Okay, everyone, welcome back for another episode of Time for Forgiveness. And we are really excited and jazzed to be with you guys on these two episodes coming up. And we have Holly Harper is our next guest, and she has an amazing story of forgiveness, redemption, and perseverance. And we're going to introduce Holly and get into her story here in a few minutes. Before we do that, we have a couple questions that listeners have sent in, and we want to address those. So, and we appreciate you guys sending in any questions that you have. We look forward to getting through those as we can for each episode. Before we do that, I just want to add a word to thank you guys so much for tuning in to Time for Forgiveness. If you have questions or a topic you'd like us to cover on a future episode, please contact us. And you can do that through our website at timeforforgiveness.org. Also, be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and follow along on our social media pages on Instagram and Facebook at Time for Forgiveness. We also are taking applications for guest submissions. If you have a story that you'd like to share and have us consider to be on the one of our episodes at Time for Forgiveness, reach out to us again through our website. Again, timeforforgiveness.org. All right. So, Father Don and Kelly, here's question number one that we're going to discuss here for a few minutes. How do I forgive someone who has not shown remorse for a crime they've committed?
Yes, and there may be a little bit more to that too. Was this also an inquiry? And I know that we get several and try to pull out some of them, but it had to do with convincing others and that sort of thing. Or
I think this one was in direct relationship to someone who had committed a crime, and it was more about the family. How do I show forgiveness for someone who has lied to his children about what happened?
Yeah,
the crime itself.
Gosh, yeah, that is so difficult to try to offer forgiveness. I go back to the idea about different definitions of forgiveness and different degrees of forgiving, and the notion of a full pardon forgiveness as opposed to a disentanglement that we all ought to do, I think, in forgiveness. Everybody ought to be able to distance themselves so that we can move on with our lives. But as far as forgiveness as a full pardon, and maybe that's what the inquirer is wanting to know, I think that's just so difficult, and I don't know that we're obligated to do that in that sense of forgiveness. They're holding on to something that is so deep, they've been hurt so badly, they're never going to forget it. It'll be a part of the choices and decisions that they make in the future based on their own emotion, their own sense of empathy for others who go through these kinds of things. But I think that we ought to disentangle ourselves from those things so that we can make wiser choices and move forward. Kelly, is that about what you're thinking? Or
I was just considering the idea of that, to me, is a form of trading. I'll do this if they do that. And we are never going to be able to control the outcome of someone else being willing to say they're sorry or take responsibility. We're only responsible for what we think and our decisions. And again, forgiveness is really the gift for ourselves, not for them.
So do you feel also that this kind of dovetails over to how to convince family members to forgive their siblings?
I think it does, Bob. And I am concerned about the word convince. It essentially means to conquer, to convince. And I don't know that we can ever have that sense of changing someone. Persuade might be a better word, but it connotes the same thing. But at least it is suggesting that people have the capacity to change their attitude, and we have some power in that, but I think that our power is not going to be through our words and trying to convince or to persuade, but I think they're going to be through our example and through the way that we can illustrate how forgiveness is healing. And I think if those who are holding on to this recognize how people are able to move on and to have a healthier life because they forgive, then that would be far more convincing or persuasive to me.
I think when I love what you said, because we do have the ability to change our attitude. And when we do, everything around us changes. And instead of convincing, like you said, it's kind of a auto-suggestion through this beautiful example of letting go. And they're seeing all these wonderful things start happening in their lives, and maybe then they're willing to start that journey for themselves.
Yeah, it's just a wonderful thing when you see people who are able to reach a new stage in their life because they understand the difference, the choice that is before them, to forgive or not to forgive. If you hold on to the that sense of not ever forgiving, it just tortures you. But if you are able to take that conscious choice, and I do believe it is that, then we set ourselves free and we elevate to another level, a much better level.
All right. Well, thank you, and thanks for submitting those questions. So we're gonna move on, and we're gonna invite in Holly Harper again. Holly's gonna come on and has a very heartfelt story about the unfortunate suicide of her brother Jerrod Harper when he was age 36. And Holly, I know you shared with me some amazing things about your brother and what you loved about him, and the thing that I asked you, and you told me he just loved life, and he was a stand-up comedian. He was also a musician, played the guitar, and he just had an infectious personality, and people just gravitated to him and loved him. And so I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts. And before we have a few questions here that we want to ask you, but I think we should just start with you, telling your story, kind of take us back, and where you want to start out is up to you. But let us understand who Jerrod was a little bit, your relationship with Jerrod, and then obviously what happened. But I know you brought up the fact that there was a period of time where you were working through some emotions that you were dealing with, your own personal guilt for what had happened. And so I want you to obviously jump into that a little bit and how you've worked through that. And then I would like you to touch on, how or why do you feel that your brother eventually turned to suicide? Because I know a lot of people wonder what happens in that scenario, and I know it's different for everybody, but I just wanted to get your insight and your feeling on what happened to Jerrod. So that said, Holly, welcome again, and we'll just turn it over to you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you all for having me. I guess let's touch on Jerrod, because he's the reason why I wanted to have this discussion with you guys today. It's been almost 3 years since his passing, and I'm finally at a place where I can actually feel like opening up and talking about it in a way that I feel like might be productive, and maybe kind of get a little, I wouldn't say closure, but a little more insight, even just from speaking with all of you and sharing this. But Jerrod, he was amazing. He was a people person all around. He was a bartender here in Lubbock. I'm located in Lubbock, Texas. So we grew up here most of our life. And he was a bartender. He studied psychology in school and always had a fascination with psychology and people, and just understood people on a level that I didn't feel like anybody else really could. Like, he was able to make friends with anybody that he met. And he was friends. Like, there was no way I could go anywhere in town with him without seeing like 5 or 6 people and trying to have conversations at the checkout line at the grocery store. Him just walking up, hugging them, asking them how they're doing, and having a whole conversation. And we were just trying to get a couple of things and get out of the store. It never happened for us that way. But he was a wonderful person, and he was my big brother. We had a 11-year age difference, but he was pretty much my stand-in, like, I want to say like co-parent, since I was 11 years old. We lost our father when I was 11. It was me, Jerrod, and my little brother. We lost our father, and so we were all raised by my grandmother, who raised pretty much all 6 of her grandchildren. She's a wonderful person, very strong-willed and a very wise woman, for sure. But after my dad passed, and I had to go live with my grandparents, Jerrod was always there. You know, he was always taking me out and coming around, and was always there for me when I needed to talk. And then into my adulthood, was there for me too. We were just really, really close with each other, and we became really close in those last couple of years before he passed. There was a period of time where we were living with each other, and so had some pretty fond memories of that. He was a third-degree black belt in Taekwondo, so martial arts always played like a big part in his life. And he and I would train together. He had a whole gym in his basement, and so he trained me how to defend myself and how to, you know, take these lessons out into life, and just kind of got me started with my passion for martial arts as well. And he was very hilarious, very sarcastic too. Anybody that knew him could tell you that for sure. But he was part of a comedy club here in Lubbock, Laugh Hub City, and finally started doing stand-up comedy about a year before his passing, and found that he was very passionate for it. He loved to make people laugh, and he enjoyed being able to get up and tell stories in a way that was kind of like a relief for him and a laugh for others. He wasn't ever really scared to lay his stuff all out on the table if it meant that other people got some sort of enjoyment out of it. He was also really musical. He wouldn't sing on stage, but he had a voice like no other. He definitely sang from the soul whenever he sang, and so he and I would get together often, and I would play guitar and he would sing. He would never really go out in public and do it. I tried to get him to, but we didn't really get there. But he loved to sing, and he loved his dogs, Havoc and Ryder. They were his whole life. He loved dogs more than people, I'm pretty sure, and he loved people a lot. So that says a lot for those dogs.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And they're with a good friend who I consider a sister now. She has them, and I get to see them sometimes. So, yeah, he was just a wonderful person. And I mean, like I had told you when we spoke before, when he passed, it was during COVID. And so there were over 700 people that showed up to his funeral service. And I think had the world not been in the pandemic at that time, I'm sure we would have seen a couple hundred more.
Right.
You know?
For sure.
He was very, very loved. And I mean, since his passing, there's been so much support and just some sense of community that has come together since his passing. That's just been absolutely amazing to me. And yeah, I mean, he was wonderful, wonderful person.
Holly, thanks for sharing that. It just sounds like your brother was an incredible man. He was in touch with the world around him. He energized the people. They had such good relationships and amazingly talented. It sounds like he could have done a lot of different things. And I'm particularly struck by his love of people, but even more of dogs. You know, Abraham Lincoln once said that you can tell a lot about a man's religion by how he treats his dog. And if he loves his dog, then you know he's going to love the rest of the world. And that's a great, great thing.
That's why I haven't heard that one, Father. I've read a lot of Abraham Lincoln quotes, but I missed that one. So thanks for sharing that. I feel better about myself. Actually, I do love dogs. I know Kelly does too.
I know Prince is treated pretty well around here usually. Yeah.
That's why he's called Prince, right? Yeah.
You know, Holly, there's a story I sometimes like to tell. It's from Rabbi Harold Kushner. And he speaks about this little boy that was sent on an errand for the first time in his life. He's old enough to go to the grocery store a few blocks away back in the days when you could send kids out on errands. And his parents send him out, you know, kind of give him a little test. And he takes a long time coming home. And so they get worried. And then their worry turns to frustration. And then their frustration turns to anger. And then when he finally does show up, they're just so angry at him. They're just so mad. What took you so long? What were you doing? Why were you out? Why you troubled us so much? And he says, you know, when I was coming back, there was a little boy, a friend of mine, a couple streets away. he was sitting on the curb and he was crying because his tricycle had broke. And I stopped so I could help him. And the parents got even madder and saying, "You don't know the first thing about how to fix a tricycle." And he looked up and he said, I know that. I stopped so I could help him cry. And at times like this and your brother's passing, it is so powerful to have those hundreds and hundreds of people knowing that none of them can fix what happened. A beautiful boy, a wonderful man has died, is taken from the world, and people wish that they could turn back time and they could fix this. And yet they were there with you, putting their arms around you and just crying about it together. And what a great tribute that is to a wonderful brother. And I know that you couldn't do this for the last couple of years, but now you can hold such a gratitude for the life that you shared with him and the love that you had as siblings and as good friends. But it hurts so badly. But I'm delighted that you have such an incredible support system that helped you to get through that.
I am truly grateful for all of them, definitely.
Holly, I'd like to you had mentioned when you first came on that it's been 3 years and you're in a space now that you feel that you can speak about it. Would you be willing to share kind of the journey of how you're able to speak about this right now? Like I'm sure there's been a lot of work that you have gotten involved with in regards to just being able to move through this experience. And what does that look like for you?
Well, it has not been easy, I will say that. It was very rocky to start. It came as a shock to a lot of people. But I personally carried some guilt for a little while because I'm pretty sure I saw it coming. I had a dream about him passing a week before it happened and was trying to mentally prepare myself, and I couldn't. Just trying to be there for him every day leading up to it. And he did a very good job of trying to cover it up and make sure he said his goodbyes and made me think that he was doing okay. So I carried that guilt with me for a good while. We had been through some stuff prior to that. A year prior to that, he had a scare and, ended up actually getting him some help. And so he really struggled with that a year leading up to that. And we'll touch on that in a little bit. But, I did not handle it very well. I definitely became a version of myself that I never saw myself being, a version I knew that could exist. Like my family, we've had a history of alcoholism and addiction on my parents' side. And so when I studied it in school, I wrote papers over it. I knew that I had a predisposition. I knew that I was very susceptible to it. But until I was in the grips of it, I didn't really think that it could happen to me, and it did. And, this is a time when I was, teaching kids music and meditation and stuff. And so it was just kind of really hard for me to go through, I started drinking very heavily, the day that it happened. We're very Irish. And so, the day that it happened, we're all sitting on his porch step and everybody's gathering, and someone handed me a bottle of Jameson. That was his favorite whiskey. And I just immediately from there, I was just trying to numb out or trying to feel things. I wasn't really sure because drinking didn't really numb things for me. Drinking amplified things. So whereas I know a lot of people use that to numb out their feelings, for me, it just kind of amplified things. And so that was something that I really struggled with for the year after that, especially with him being a bartender. If I walked into the bar where he was working and, he's memorialized, they have a picture of him up there, people would just hand me alcohol, like, "Oh, here you go. We miss him. Here's alcohol. Here's alcohol." So just, there was a lot of that. And it was a temptation that at the time I just was not strong enough to say no to, because I just had felt myself like I had let myself down. I had let him down. all of these people cared about him so much, and I could have done something if only I would have thrown him in my car and just taken his butt to the hospital. But, he was a very strong-willed person. That would have never happened like that. And I know that now for sure, that there's not really anything I could have done outside of what I did. And that was show up every day and, talk to him, let him know I love him. And the afternoon before it happened, we had lunch with each other. And I wanted to meet up. We met up at our favorite spot, a little Thai restaurant here in Lubbock where we would always meet. And, we had a talk, and I asked him to pray over food. I was to the point before he passed where I was praying before I ate every meal. He's like, "You want to pray with me?" And I felt he was in a bad spot, and he would not do it. And so I just prayed out loud beside him. And I told him, I know you struggle with, you're not really into religion, and I get it. And I'm not a religious person either, but I like to say the things I'm grateful for, and be grateful for the fact that we're here having this time with each other. And I had a feeling when he left that place that day that something was not right because of the way that he said bye to me and how he hugged me and put his forehead on me and just told me to stay strong and how amazing. Like, he just gave me this whole speech, and I was just like, when he left, the last words I heard him say, and this is what stuck with me, and this is what's kind of gotten me to really focus on the mental health piece of this, is Sean, the little man that owns that restaurant, told him, "Hey, you're getting real skinny. You need to put on some meat." Because he had gotten really skinny. He was really depressed. And he also struggled with substance abuse. I know my family would not be happy with me talking about that, but that was the reality. He struggled with some substance abuse there at the end, and he could just not get a hold of it. And Jerrod said, depression is a B. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word, but he said, yeah, depression is a B word. And then he walked out the door, and that was the last time I saw him. And so I got the call later that night, and broke down and be with my family and just deal with all of that together. I mean, we kind of all saw it coming because there were signs leading up to it, and we knew his struggles, and we had a really hard time with getting him help. He would help anyone. He would stop and help someone on the street. I've seen him do it, but he just had a hard time helping himself. And so, kind of reflecting on that with where I'm at now and where I was at during that year, like I went pretty dark. And I got to a point where I myself got to that spot that, I mean, maybe not the exact same spot that he was in, but I definitely know now what drinking a lot can do to me personally and what's done to my loved ones. And, I got to a point where I was on the floor and I was crying and I was ready to die. I could not deal with it anymore. And there was other things that I was having a hard time dealing with, and it was just all too much. And at this point, I'd also had gone to the doctor, and they had put me on some medication. So my brother was diagnosed with bipolar 2. And he got the diagnosis, but didn't really want to take medication for it. I think that there's a lot of pressure put on men, especially when it comes to mental health. Men, like with a pride thing, that you don't need help or you don't want help. And I know that he was definitely dealing with that. So they had put me on a medication. When I went to the doctor and expressed what I was feeling, they basically were like, "Oh, well, your brother died and he had this, so you probably have it." And then they stuck me on a medication. Didn't really ask me my drinking habits, and I wasn't very honest with myself about it at the time. So when I was drinking and taking that, it put me in a really bad place where I was ready to end it, and I hallucinated, I think. I'm not sure if it was a hallucination or if it was something that was real to me, but I'm just sitting on the floor crying, and I'm texting every one of my family members and my best friend and all the people close to me. I just sent them, "I love you. I love you." And it was like I saw a dark figure enter the room that was just like looking at me and kind of like letting me know that it was time for me to pull myself out of that place, that I wasn't about to go down that path. I needed to make a choice right then, or all these people that I'm telling I love them, I'm going to hurt them more than anybody ever has, because I know how much it hurt me when he left, and I couldn't do it. And so I went and I got myself some help. I started going to AA every single day after that, because my little brother, who lives in Georgia, he's in the Army, got my text and immediately called me and, what's going on? And I tell him, and he said, text me the address that you're at. And I had to send a police officer over to the house to check on me, and I'm just upset. And I got to sit with that police officer, luckily outside of the house, and just explain what was going on and where I was at mentally, that I was, trying to get my mental health in order, and I was just struggling. And my grandma had to come and pick me up. My Meemaw, who was 87, and my little sister had to come and pick me up. And I just felt embarrassed, ashamed, all of those things that you don't want to feel like in front of your caregiver that's taken care of you your whole life, especially one that's already been through this horrible thing with, just a year earlier. And just, I could not live like that. And so I just decided in that moment to make a change. And I went and got sober. And I went and I stayed at my Meemaw's house for 2 weeks straight. I didn't come home to my house. And I went to my meetings every day and started praying and kind of tried to redefine what my higher power looks like to me. And it worked somehow for me. I know it does not work for everybody, and everybody's journey is different, but that is what helped me personally. And I don't think that I would have been able to progress where I did had I not had that sort of support and just actually going and talking. And it became something that it wasn't like, oh, okay, woe is me, I got to go do this. It was like, all right, I'm going to wake up and go have some free coffee and talk to some of these wonderful people who are all sharing these stories, who are just great, nice people. And I'm going to go have my lunch here, and that's going to be how I start my day. And then I'm going to continue on, and I'm going to figure out what else from there. But it all kind of centered around that for a little bit. And yeah, it helped me a lot. And so, by doing that work and then doing my own meditations and kind of getting to a place where I felt okay talking to God again, and actually telling him, all right, I'm having these thoughts, I'm going to just hand it all over to you, and whatever happens. That's what did it for me. So, but it took me getting to that really dark place to do that for some reason. And I'm not ashamed of it anymore. I want to be able to talk about it, because, I know that there are probably a lot of other people struggling out there, and other people that have dealt with losing a loved one to this, and probably have experienced the same kind of thing, feeling the guilt and just not being able to take it anymore. But I don't know.
Well, Holly, I think that you're exactly right. I think that it's so true that there's that interplay of the light and the darkness that are always fighting for possession of what's going on in our lives. Sometimes it's very interior, and sometimes it's externally made known. But the fact that you could keep coming back from these places of great despair and return to a place of gratitude, and it sounds like that you are finding that now in the 12-step program, and the recognition of our own powerlessness, the acceptance of a higher power, and to know that there are a lot of good people out there who can help us through this, because we don't go through it alone. We don't have to go through it alone. But usually in our deepest despair, that's where we find ourselves, is all by ourselves. I want to ask you a question. As you know, the podcast is focused on time for forgiveness, and there's time for forgiveness in the past, time for forgiveness right now, and there's time for forgiveness in the future. And you had spoken a bit about your family's dynamic, the function and the dysfunction, the things that make up who we are. I happen to be Irish also, and we have those proclivities for drinking or associating that with the good time. We have lots of
Yeah.
other things that make up our family's function, but there's also the dysfunction that plays in. And you had mentioned, a little bit of mental issues that might run through there also. And I know that before Jerrod's passing, before his death, you probably, and I think you indicated this, that there were a number of things that you held on to that were kind of despairing or maybe just depressing, but they sent you to some places of depth. And somehow in that depth of despair, you were able to climb out of that. And in the last 3 years, you seem to have done the same thing, even though with your brother's actions, both his choices and then his ultimate choice to take his own life, the gamut of emotions that you feel, not just the great gratitude that you have for knowing him, but also your anger and frustration and hurt and pain of some of the things that he was doing, but also your guilt about not being able to save him. But then I guess I'm asking about the past and the present as a means to the future. And in this time for forgiveness, because we'll all be, I don't know if you say that we'd be pulled down into that cellar of despair again, but there will be times in our lives that won't be all that wonderful and buoyant and happy and uplifting. Do you think that those patterns continue? And if you find yourself down in the cellar again, do you have the means then to pull yourself up?
That's a great question, and that's actually something I've been looking at recently. So I made it to my year mark of sobriety, and I got to celebrate it.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm actually a bartender as well, and a lot of people might find that very hard, especially for someone that was in recovery. Like, how are you bartending? As you know, it's obviously not conducive to your recovery. But for me, it all boiled down to, well, if I'm going to drink, I'll find a way to do it. It kind of gave me a way to empower myself, and I was constantly in a position of having to say no every day, to the point where it wasn't even a thing where I had to think about saying no. It just became normal for me. And I met a man who I am now engaged to, who was on the same path as me. He was also a bartender, sober, and we were able to kind of share that with each other and became good friends because of that. Also for our love of music and sense of humor. I could go on and on about why I love this man. He's the most wonderful thing in the world to me. I'm very lucky that I have him on my side. But I have a good support system, for one. But I know that if I didn't have that support system, that I have the power within myself to realize what I'm doing, make those decisions, and come right back to it. Because after the year was up, we both decided, well, maybe we want to have a margarita here and there. And maybe we do want to occasionally have a beer with the family. We did it at first, it was like that, but then St. Patrick's Day that just passed, I had the opportunity to drink Jameson like the Irish person that I am and stay up all night singing songs. And, while it was wonderful and I enjoyed myself, the next day I woke up and I just felt like, okay, I have some decisions to make here. I could have done that all night long without consuming anything, and I wouldn't feel as bad as I do right now. It can put you in a very unsafe place. Like, I don't want to have to worry about my family and the legal ramifications for one, or just whatever can happen, and risking everything that I have built and every milestone that I've touched on the way there. I just don't think it's worth the risk for me. So we've gone back to, after St. Patrick's Day, sitting down and having a discussion of, all right, so what do we think now? Is this something that we can keep allowing? And I'm like, it's not for me. That's just something that I have to realize about myself. And I'm not a big I'm kind of small, and so I just like I don't have the perception personally of being able to tell what that limit is, and then there are factors that go into that, how much you eat or whatever if you're tired, and I don't want to think about all those things if I just like it doesn't seem worth it to me, and so when it comes down to it, I know I have the tools to get through a lot without that crutch, and I feel great about it.
You should feel great about it, Holly. It just sounds like you're just making wise decisions, and hopefully we all are becoming a little bit wiser as we are here longer. I happen to serve in the inner city, and they have a little saying there, and some of our parishioners, that we're either basement people or we're balcony people. And sometimes when we go into the basement, it's dark and it's cold, and we turn into ourselves. But up on the balcony, you step out and there's sunshine and there's light and there's fresh air and there's joy. And I guess we all have those tendencies, as you're talking about, as we're dealing with things that are fighting for possession for our souls, to get out of the basement and go up to the balcony. It sounds like you've really made that decision. And I think that's something that our listeners really appreciate also, because we all have those tendencies to get stuck in the basement when we ought to be elevated to the balcony.
Well said, Father. Well said.
Definitely.
Kelly, do you have a question you want to ask?
Holly, one of the things that I understand is that we teach what we've moved through. We're really passionate about sharing something that we've moved through. And obviously, what an incredible story, and the courage it has been just to work on yourself and be able to get up the next day and keep moving. And I just would love to ask you, in the beginning of the podcast, you said, my story that I'm able to tell now, you really want it to make a difference in the world. And I guess I'd like to ask you, what are your plans to bring this story? Is it through music? Is that how you're wanting to reach others?
Yes, definitely. Music has always been and will always be my number one outlet since I was a kid. My dad was a musician as well, and a singer-songwriter. Like, I grew up helping him set up the equipment on the stage and watching him until he passed. And it's always been a big part of my life, and it's gotten me through a lot. It got me through his passing, and it's gotten me through Jerrod's passing, minus the 1 year period when I just didn't do anything besides drink and try to get through it. I am to the point now where I'm seeing like that I'm ready to put these emotions into music and not be afraid of them. That's what's kept me from creating up until the last couple of months. And now stuff is just kind of starting to flow out. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm feeling okay about things now. It's not so fresh. And I really would like to share my experience through music. And I want to create sounds that emote things from people and make them think, but not too deeply. I don't want to put people in a bad spot. I want them to I want to give people the tools to like realize things for themselves and use them in a way that is useful and that they can apply it to their lives. And there have been so many music artists that have gotten me through it. I can name a whole list, but just kind of knowing how they've made me feel is what I want to do for other people. And whether that's through music or just speaking and meeting with people, talking about it and normalizing it and having conversations and, all right, I think those two go hand in hand with each other, but that is really what I want to do.
Well, that's amazing. I love that. Holly, can you talk about the mindful social that you're behind? Let the audience know a little bit about what that is about.
Oh, that's my marketing business. You did some research. I have been kind of reshaping that for myself. I started doing marketing back in 2017 and have kind of taken a break since, 2020, because I was in the music industry doing marketing, and I was with an agency out of Austin, Texas called Pivotal Agency, managing music clients, doing touring and handling all of their socials and their marketing side of their shows and everything. And then whenever COVID hit, hence the reason why I'm a bartender again, it was time for music to cease. So I've been kind of reshaping what that looks like for me. I really like to help people get their voice out and, be a sounding board for them to like find their actual voice. And when it comes to like online communities, that's kind of where we're at with technology and everything right now. It's that, everything is online, and it can be an exhausting experience, or it can be something that's like you can plan it out and not have to think about it so much, and get all the messages out that you want to get out, and not have to worry about it. So I do a lot of the planning and working with clients to get their voice out and get their vision out for what they want, whether it's them artist side or company side. I've worked with a couple of companies, really get their mission statement out there and put them out there in a way that really expresses who they are and what they're trying to do. I have a passion for that too. I really love to help people find their voice.
Where do listeners, if they wanted to find out more about Mindful Social, where do they tap into that at?
I am on Facebook and I'm on Instagram as well, but Facebook's going to be more or less where you'll be able to find that.
Okay. All right. Well, I wanted to ask you this question before we wrapped up, Holly. I guess it would go like this. What do you think, Jerrod, if he was here, what do you think he would say to you about his wishes and his hopes for you going forward? What advice do you think Jerrod would want to impart on you now?
Well, I know I sound like a crazy person if I say this, but it's fine because I might be, but I'm okay with that. But I swear I hear him talk to me sometimes, maybe not auditorily, but when certain things come up, I can kind of hear his voice in my head of kind of what he might think about it. And I think for me now is the same wish that he had when he passed. He left me a letter and it said, keep singing. He told me to keep singing.
Keep singing.
I'm going to keep singing. And I think that he would want me to continue to try and help people because that was what he did. He helped people, listen to them, and really, really be a safe place for people to open up and, help find them the resources if ever it comes to that. We formed a nonprofit organization since his passing. There's 10 committee members that have formed it here in Lubbock, and it's called Harperfest. And it's a nonprofit organization and a grant that funds mental health services for people within the service industry in the local community. And I think that he would really want me to pursue that and to try and help other people and be there for my family.
All right. Well, that's amazing. And Holly, I just want to thank you for coming on and just being so open and vulnerable and sharing your heart. And I know this story is going to help so many people out there that are struggling with many of these same topics and just struggles, and challenges that we all deal with in one form or another. So thank you very much for being on the show today. And again, listeners, you can follow us and listen to Holly's recording at timeforforgiveness.org. And this is episode number 5 coming on in a couple of weeks. And Father, did you want to wrap up with a word of wisdom here for us and our listeners?
Gosh, wouldn't that be nice if I could just spew out some wisdom when I'm called upon to do so? I think Holly hit it pretty well when she hears the voice of Jerrod telling her to keep singing, because that's what we all ought to do, is to know that we are each given a voice. And that voice within us, as St. Teresa the Little Flower said, to dance, to sing, and to just celebrate life in spite of all of its sham and drudgery. As Desiderata says, it's still a wonderful world. It's a beautiful world. If you don't mind, I will mention one other thing, and this kind of does full circle because I know one of our listeners had asked about role modeling, and this might appeal more to the Catholics that are listening because we have all of our saints, and they had mentioned Pat and Sylvia had written in about a saint named Emil Capon, and I do just want to put in a little plug for this. I may be mispronouncing his name. But they had suggested he's such an incredible role model for forgiveness in our world today. He was a 20th century priest from Pilsen, Kansas, simple parish priest. And as one of our bishops told us, that there haven't been many simple parish priests that have ever been canonized. So that says a lot about us and what we don't do well. But anyway, this guy worked in the parish, but really found his calling during the Second World War to be a chaplain in the Army. And he served there with the soldiers. And then after the war, he came back and then was drawn in another time in the Korean conflict, quite the war itself. He was taken prisoner and he died there in Korea. His body, they thought, was just thrown into the ravine, into the ditch, into the waters that were there. But they found out later that it had been separated and it had been buried and then was thrown or taken back by the American government and placed in a grave in Hawaii that was for unknown soldiers. And they just found out a couple of years ago. So he died in 1951, but just a year or two ago, they were able through DNA to identify his remains, brought him back to the Wichita area where he has been laid to rest, canonized, and truly is a saint of forgiveness. He was tortured horribly during that imprisonment as a POW. He was such an encouragement to his fellow soldiers, and they looked to him in so many ways. And when it was infested with dysentery and lice and just horrible hunger and nothing for them, he kept encouraging his boys, kept encouraging them onward. And of course, he eventually died, and his final words to his captors were words of forgiveness, almost like Jesus on the cross, saying, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." And our church was really built upon this idea of forgiveness. And so as Holly is talking about a wonderful group of people out there, a group of musicians and a group at AA and other good people, our church also has good models out there, spiritual companions and spiritual saints. So I just put this plug in that if you'd like to know more about this particular saint, Emil Capon, he is a great saint for forgiveness. In fact, a Kansas City author named Joe Drape has written a wonderful book, came out in 2020, called The Saint Makers. And Joe is a best-selling author, writer for the New York Times, actually a sports writer, but he had spent some time in the middle of Kansas and came to fall in love with this now saint, Emil Capon, or I should say there are different levels of sainthood. He's a martyr, and he is listed with the title of servant of God, but in my eyes, in the eyes of so many, he is clearly a saint. So I thank you for letting me put in that little plug.
Holly, I just want to acknowledge you for coming on today. It takes great courage, and I find sometimes when we are faced with these unthinkable events that we wouldn't ask in our lives, we do have an opportunity, or maybe a calling, I'd say, to really look and find the good and have an opportunity to bring a message to the world. And this is such an important message of bringing awareness, I believe, around a topic that at times can be so difficult. And so I just want to thank you for being so brave, and also to be vulnerable and willing and open to share. And I know your story is going to help so many.
Thank you so much.
I just want to echo that, Holly, and you're truly an inspiring woman, and I want to just encourage you, obviously, to keep going and sharing your message of hope and forgiveness, and bringing that message to as many people as you can. And thank you. This kind of wraps up this episode of Time for Forgiveness, everyone. Appreciate you being on board, and continue to share this message with those. If our messages are inspiring you, please share on your social media accounts too as well. So Holly, take care. Thank you again. And until the next episode of Time for Forgiveness, everybody have a blessed day. Thank you.